Hello guys, welcome to the fiction series. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto x Grayfia x Rias x Venelana? Part 1. Huge shout out to Tachyon99 for this story. If you want more awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So without wasting any time, let's get into the video. Forest in the Amazon. The sound of birds chirping filled the air, as the afternoon sun shined down on a vast field. The light of the sun illuminated the area, allowing for the damage to the field to be shown. The entire field was filled with slash marks that seemed to cover the entire area, while trees were sliced into pieces, but the cuts were incredibly clean and smooth, showing skill was very much a factor. Along with the cut trees, there were areas where entire parts of the ground were cut up, but only seemed to be in specific areas. Along with all the cuts in the area, there were craters everywhere, while there were also giant piles of rubble in random areas, where huge boulders once were. Now they were just huge piles of pebbles and stones. All in all, it looked as if a major battle had happened, but in actuality, it was a training ground that had just been recently used. In this field was a young man, who was sitting on a stone that had been cleanly cut in half to provide a seat for the young man. He had fair, yet pale skin and white hair that was swept back completely, and sapphire blue eyes that currently showed great focus. He was wearing a black coat that reached down to his feet and had neon blue, serpentine patterns and designs, with the three coattails being ragged and tattered at the edges. He was also wearing a black, sleeveless zippered turtleneck beneath a midnight blue formal vest. He was also wearing charcoal gray, fingerless gloves, black pants, and dark teal boots with straps. Next to the young man was an oak katana that had an ornate bronze guard and a black scabbard with a dark blue cord tied to it. Laying next to the young man appeared to be a black panther with shiny black fur and red markings covering its body. Devil May Cry 5 Virgil, Yamato, and Shadow. This young man was currently on a quest to search for someone. He was currently reading through a thick, brown leather-bound journal, before he pulled out a pen from inside his coat and began to write notes inside the journal. He then put away the pen, before pulling out a picture that showed a young version of himself with his, once spiky, blonde hair and a girl with red hair, amber eyes, and brown skin. He was wearing a pair of black shorts and navy blue t-shirt, while she was wearing a white shirt and a black skirt. The two of them could be seen hugging each other from the side while she had a wide grin and he was giving a simple smile. He looked at the photo for a little longer before looking up at the sky and thought, I'm getting close, I just know it. I've narrowed it down to either Kyoto, Europe, or America. He then looked back at the photo before thinking, I will find you, Lupus. That's a promise. He was then broken from his thoughts when a small red magic circle appeared by his ear. He then narrowed his eyes in annoyance, causing the panther to wake up when he began answering, What is it? I was in the middle of something very important. The person on the other end spoke. Virgil then asked, What is this favor? The person spoke again, getting Virgil to frown in annoyance. Why should I go to Ko? What is so important that you're sending me there? The person spoke again. Virgil now narrowed his eyes in greater annoyance, and his voice reflected this, when he asked, How does this concern me? Better question, why should I care? The person didn't speak for a second, before asking Virgil something. If I do this for you, you are going to help me find someone, no questions asked, and you will promote me to king, that is my price. The person was quiet again, before they spoke, and then Virgil schooled his expression. Thank you, I will head there immediately. With that, the magic circle disappeared, and the young man stood up, getting the panther to do so as well, closed the journal before tucking into his coat, then he picked up his sword. He then drew his sword before making two slash marks that left shining blue marks of energy, before they expended and created a portal of purple and black energy. He then walked inside with the panther, with the last thoughts on his mind being, I'd better not come to regret this, Sirzechs. And with that, the portal closed, leaving no trace that the young man and panther were there, except for all the damage that was done to the field. Ko Academy, a cult research club building. 5 minutes ago, the city of Ko is a place in Japan that has a rich martial arts history, but is most famous for its many ideas on the supernatural. Of course, only those connected to the supernatural know about this fact. Ko Academy is also a school that is rich with tradition and was considered one of the top schools in Ko. Ko Academy, until recently, was an all-girls school, but has recently become co-ed, and also provides classes from elementary school all the way through college. Currently, we focus on a different section of the school, where there appeared to be an old school building. Inside, the building was themed after the Victorian style, with chairs, tables, and couches all following the style. The shutters were open, allowing the room to be filled with light from the afternoon sun. This was the building of the Occult Research Club. Inside the main room were several people. However, these were not ordinary people, as they were not humans, they were devils. Among the people, there was a group of young people who wore the school uniform, and they consisted of 2 boys and 4 girls. The 2 boys appeared to be quite the opposites, with one being a blonde Bishounen with bluish-gray eyes. Meanwhile, the other boy seemed to be quite plain with brown hair and eyes. These were Kiba Yuto and Issei Hayato, members of the Occult Research Club. As for the girls, they all were quite attractive in their own rights. The first was a young girl, with long blonde hair and green eyes, with cup breasts. The second girl was a girl who appeared to be quite small for her age, and she had white hair and brown eyes, with low B-cup breasts. The third girl had long black hair held up by an orange ribbon and violet eyes, with DD-cup breasts. The last girl had long crimson-red hair, blue-green eyes, and D-cup breasts. These were Asia Argento, Kaneko Tuju, Akino Himejima, and Rias Gremory. This group were all a peerage, with Rias Gremory being their king. Another group appeared to consist of 1 adult-looking male and 15 young women. The young man appeared to be around 20 years old, with blonde hair and dark blue eyes. He was wearing a burgundy blazer with gold embroidery, a white dress shirt with the last button undone to show a bit of the male chest, and burgundy pants. However, he had an arrogant and lustful look on his face, while staring at Rias and the other female members of her peerage. This was Riser Phoenix, betrothed to Rias, and standing behind him were a group of women, clad in different styles of clothing, who were all a part of his peerage. Off to the side was a beautiful maid, with silver hair that was in 2 braids that reached down to her back, and silver eyes. She also had red lipstick, silver eyes, and E-cup breasts. This was Grayfia Lucifuge, queen of one of the 4 Mao of the underworld, and the strongest queen. Currently, however, she was monitoring the meeting taking place between Rias Gremory and Riser Phoenix. Things had devolved quite rapidly, as from the beginning, Riser had not cared for how Rias felt, and was rubbing her leg while holding strands of hair and smelling her. Things got worse once her peerage entered, and her pawn, Issei Hayadu, entered and spoke out against Riser for who he was, even shouting in denial that he was her betrothed, since she could do better than him. Rias kept refusing to marry him, but was, eventually, put into a corner. Eventually, Riser called his own peerage, showing all 15 women, getting Issei to cry about how a bastard like him already has a harem. However, if one were to look closely, they would see half of these women did not look very happy. As things progressed, the tension got worse and worse between Rias and Riser. "For the last time, I am not marrying you, Riser," Rias exclaimed. "You and I both know that there's no way this marriage will be denied, my dear Rias," Riser stated, getting Rias to flinch, before he then continued, "After all, our family lines are growing thin, and a merging of the houses will be a great turning point for the future of us devils." Rias exclaimed, "I still refuse. I will beat you in a raiding game and free myself from this pact between our houses." Riser then replied, "Oh, but if you do that, then you would incur the wrath of my family." "We wouldn't want that now, would we?" Riser asked with a smug tone, getting Rias and her peerage to glare at him, except for Asia. Asia began getting his attention. "Bucho-sen wants to talk to you about this. Can't you find it in your heart to listen?" Riser looked at Asia, before cackling loudly. He then looked at the Asia while wiping a tear, and said, "It's adorable that you want to try so hard to help your king, but this is not a matter a resurrected devil should stick their unwanted attention in." Asia shrunk at his words, before she was completely frightened by the lustful look he directed at her, and he then cupped her chin, lifting her head to look at him, and said, "However, I may be inclined to listen if you were to service me." Riser then licked his lips, and Asia began to completely shake out of fear. Issei then shouted, "Hey asshole! Get your filthy hands off of Asia!" Riser then sneered and glared at Issei before saying, "How dare you address me like that? I will show you your place." Riser then snapped his fingers and exclaimed, "Mira!" Mira was a young girl with blue hair and brown eyes. She was wearing a white haori with a red obi, which is under a red happy coat. She wears bandages around her forearms and shins while also having guards on her shins. She also sported a pair of Zora and a polearm as a weapon. Currently, Mira was charging at Issei, with her weapon ready to strike. Everyone watched as she was about to strike, when suddenly, her polearm fell apart into dozens of small pieces. This confused everyone, while Grayfia was suspicious on what happened, before they all then felt a pulse of demonic energy that sent Mira flying back, until she hit the wall, where she fell unconscious. Everyone was now really confused, until they all felt a shift in energy, before a portal of purple and black energy opened up. The two peerages were on guard, with Riser not caring, but Grayfia, recognizing the technique, had wide eyes. Everyone watched as a sword began to appear out of the portal, before it then showed a young man with white swept-back hair of about 5 feet 11 inches walking out holding the hilt of the sword in his right hand, and the scabbard in his left. Once the young man was in plain view, Grayfia went wide-eyed at who she was looking at, while Rias, Aquino, and Kaneko all felt like they knew who this was, but they couldn't remember where they met him. After he completely exited the portal, a black panther with shiny black fur and red markings followed before the portal closed. They watched as the young man surveyed his surroundings with cautious eyes, impressing Grayfia, before he flicked his sword around, and then slowly sheathed it back into its scabbard. He then looked down at Mira with cold eyes that seemed to glow with power, before saying in a voice so cold, it made everyone shiver, some not for the same reason, "I don't have time for weaklings such as this." He then looked back up and looked around before asking, in a tone that demanded respect, "Now, where is Rias Gremory?" Rias was curious on why she felt like she knew this young man, and why he was asking for her. She was about to reply, but was cut off when Riser shouted, "Who the hell are you? What do you think you're doing interrupting an important meeting?" Virgil turned towards him and looked at Riser as if he were mere prey before a predator, and only Grayfia saw his hand twitch towards his sword, which he stopped by moving towards the young man. They watched as he turned towards Grayfia, before the two looked at each other for a minute, and then Grayfia bowed, and said, "Welcome back, Virgil. I trust you have been well these past 5 years?" Once Grayfia said his name, Rias, Aquino, and Kaneko all went wide-eyed at finally recognizing who this was, but everyone else was still confused on who this was. Virgil then nodded his head and replied, "Yes, I have, Grayfia-sensei." This now shocked everyone, except Rias, Aquino, and Kaneko, as they had no idea that the Grayfia Lucifuge, the strongest queen, had a student. Riser, however, believed that this person was a weakling and shouldn't be here, and exclaimed, "Excuse me, but this meeting is between people of importance, so a weakling such as yourself has no right to be here." At these words, Grayfia then began glaring at Riser, along with Rias, Aquino, and Kaneko, and was about to say something, but suddenly, an incredible amount of demonic energy was felt and everyone began to feel as if gravity was increasing. They all looked towards the source and found it to be Virgil, who currently had shadowed eyes, before he suddenly appeared before Riser and launched a punch into his stomach, causing a flash of light, before Riser was launched into the wall, with a severe wound on his stomach. Everyone looked and saw that Virgil was now sporting a set of gauntlets and greaves. The gauntlets and greaves were black in color, with the gauntlets resembling a wolf's head with fangs and mane, while the greaves looked like clawed legs. However, everyone grew incredibly uneasy at the light that seemed to flow through the veins of the gauntlets and greaves. Despite the uneasiness they were feeling from the light, everyone was quite impressed at their design and the speed that Virgil just exhibited. Everyone then heard a shout of pain, and looked towards Riser and saw that he was clutching his stomach in pain, before he shouted, "I'm not healing." Everyone was shocked by this as most knew about the Phoenix family's legendary healing abilities. Riser then glared at Virgil, who was still sporting the greaves and gauntlets, and exclaimed, "What did you do to me?" Virgil lifted his right gauntlet up to his face and calmly began to examine it, before he replied with a question of his own, "Holy light, is quite painful, isn't it?" This question shocked everyone at someone owning a weapon that uses holy light. Even Grayfia was shocked by this, as she never knew about such a weapon existing, but then she grew suspicious about how it was possible for a devil to wield such a weapon. Virgil then continued, "You are currently experiencing pain, due to my attack cutting off your demonic power, and since you are of the Phoenix family, it is even more painful due to your body trying to heal itself. Think of it like a brick wall. A wall that will never break or wear, and you're trying to dig through it, with your bare hands. Everyone was dumbfounded at what the weapon actually did to Riser, as it not only caused damage, but sealed off his demonic power. Grayfia then clapped her hands and said, "All right, everyone. That is enough. Now since it has been decided, there will be a rating game between Rias and Riser." Grayfia then turned to Virgil and asked, "When will he be able to use his demonic power again, Virgil?" Virgil answered as the gauntlets and greaves dispersed, and his sword reappeared in his hand. "He will regain his demonic power in 2 weeks. However, he will still be unable to move properly until he has fully healed. So, I recommend a total of 18 days before the rating game takes place." Grayfia nodded her head and said, "In that case, the rating game shall take place 18 days from today." With that, Riser and his peerage left, with half of his peerage members seemed to not want to go, which Virgil caught and with incredible speed, gave them a piece of paper without being noticed, before they disappeared. After Riser's peerage was gone, everyone calmed down. Virgil then turned to Grayfia and held his sword like a cane before he said, "It is good to see you again, Grayfia-sensei. I see you are still as beautiful as the day I left." Grayfia smiled and said, "Thank you for the compliment." Virgil then asked, "Now, can someone tell me where Rias is?" Rias then stepped forward and said, "I'm right here, Virgil-kun." Virgil looked towards her, and then everyone saw his eyes soften slightly and he said, in a polite tone, "It is good to see you again, Rias." At this, Rias began to tear up, before she launched herself into his arms and began to hug him while crying her heart out with tears of joy. Virgil braced himself when she launched into him, but then relaxed and hugged her back. After a minute of hugging, the two separated, but then Virgil felt a pair of soft breasts on his back while a pair of arms wrapped around him. He then heard a sultry voice whisper in his ear, Era, you've been gone for so long, Virgil-kun. I'll have to punish you for that." Virgil turned to see the one holding him was Akino, and she was currently smiling at him as she tried to mess with him. He then turned the tables on her, when he disappeared from her grip. She was confused on where he was until she felt herself get lifted up in a bridal carry. She turned to the one holding her to see Virgil looking right at her, causing her to flush in embarrassment. He then said in a polite tone, "Who knew that the ultimate sadist was weak to being attacked herself?" Getting Akino to flush some more, getting Grayfia and Rias to smile, while Rias giggled at Akino's embarrassment. Virgil then turned to Kaneko, seeing as she hadn't come up to greet him. He then put Akino down, getting her to pout, since she had wanted to embarrass him, not the other way around. Virgil then moved towards Kaneko, who had been shaking with her eyes shadowed. She then saw a pair of boots enter her vision, and looked up to see Virgil standing before her. The two looked at each other for a little bit before Virgil opened his arms, getting Kaneko's will to break down. She then launched herself into his arms, and wrapped her arms and legs around him, while he also began to hug her. Everybody saw she was shaking and they listened to hear she was crying while whispering, "You're finally back," over and over again. Virgil then said, "Yes, I'm back." After a while, Kaneko finally calmed down, and then Virgil put her down, before he looked to the three and said, "It is good to see you four again after all these years," he said with a polite and calm tone, getting the four to smile. Before they could say any more, Issei came over and asked Bucho, "Who's this guy?" At this, Rias remembered that she has to introduce her other peerage members to Virgil. Rias then turns and says, "Everyone, this is Virgil. He was actually one of the first friends I made along with Kaneko, Akino, and Sona." Rias then turned to Virgil and said, "Virgil-kun, these are my other peerage members, Kiba Yudo, my knight, Asia Argento, my bishop, and Issei Haidu, my only pawn." Virgil looked at the three, before his gaze focused on Issei, and his eyes narrowed while beginning to glow. Everyone noticed this and were wondering what was going on, before Virgil's eyes stopped glowing, and he pointed at Kiba and Asia before saying, "These two have potential." He then gestured towards Issei, and said, "This one is trash." Issei took offense to this comment, and he got mad and summoned his sacred gear before grabbing Virgil by his coat. He then shouted, "Who the hell do you think you are to be calling me trash, huh?" Virgil then narrowed his eyes at Issei, before they started glowing again, and his grip tightened on his sword. The only ones to notice this action were Grayfia, Akino, Rias, Kaneko, and Kiba, and they quickly tried to get Issei to let him go, but they were too late when Virgil disappeared from view. Virgil was then spotted behind Issei, slowly sheathing his sword, before they heard the ring of his sword being sheathed, and then Issei was covered in slash marks. He then turned to Rias, eyes still glowing, and said, "You should have better control of your peerage, Rias, otherwise, they very well may die on the battlefield." He then focused on Kiba, Kaneko, and Akino, before saying, "And stop coddling them and their issues, or else they will stagnate and fade." This got the three to freeze in shock, before he then said, "Fortunately, I am here to ensure that they have these issues beaten out of them." Rias stuttered out, "What do you mean?" Virgil then turned to Rias and said, "As of this moment, I have been requested by your brother to be your trainer for the raiding game, since he noticed you have not trained or attacked your peerage's issues head-on. Like a certain damper I've heard about." At this Rias flinched, before his eyes stopped glowing. He then turned to Grayfia and said, "Grayfia-sensei, if you would come with me, we will be heading to Sirzechs, where I will give the two of you some papers." Grayfia nodded her head in understanding, before Virgil then looked back at Rias with glowing eyes and said, "You and the rest of your peerage shall train with me over the next 18 days, and I will be putting all of you through training so harsh. It will make my training under Grayfia-sensei look easy." This got Rias, Akino, and Kaneko to look incredibly fearful, since they remembered all the tough training Grayfia had put him under. From needing to dodge multiple spears of ice being launched at high speeds, to climbing an active volcano with a boulder tied to his back that was amplified by weight seals while lava was coming down. Virgil then turned around, drew his sword, and then slashed the air, opening a portal that he and Grayfia began to move towards. Before he entered the portal, he said one final thing: "I will meet you at your family's villa in 3 days, Rias, as I have things to take care of first." He then turned and said, "When I get there, you guys had better be training, or else I will make everything much harder. And to ensure that you all train accordingly, Shadow will be going with you." Rias was confused at the name, before she asked, "Who's Shadow?" Rias then felt something metallic rub against her leg, and saw that it was the black and red panther that had appeared with Virgil, and she realized its fur was what felt metallic. Virgil then said, "That is Shadow, and don't think he is just a simple panther, after all." Virgil then snapped his fingers, and Shadow Tail extended, before the end expanded and grew spikes, now resembling a flail, before it quickly whipped the tail at a chair, shattering the chair, and getting everyone, except Virgil and Grayfia, to jump. Virgil then finished his sentence, "He can cause just as much damage and pain as I could, if he wanted." With that, Virgil and Grayfia entered the portal, before it closed. Then they were gone, leaving Rias, and her peerage was Shadow, who was currently watching all of them intently. Rias, Akino, and Kaneko then all thought the same thing: "We are so screwed." With Virgil and Grayfia, the two were currently walking out of a portal, into the office of a surprised Sirzechs Lucifer, who then gained a smile. "Virgil, it is so good to see you again. I take it you've met with Rias already?" Sirzechs exclaimed. However, he began sweating when he had to instantly use both hands to catch the strike of a sheathed sword, courtesy of an annoyed Virgil. "Yes, I did. However, you seem to have forgotten to inform me about her betrothed being there as well," Virgil said, with his annoyance seeping through his voice. Sirzechs began sweating even more, and said in a nervous tone, "Well, I forgot." Virgil then began adding more pressure and said, "I suggest that you don't forget anything again, Sirzechs, or I may just have to inform the wife of a certain Red Satan." At that, Sirzechs began paling out of fear, considering his wife had taken a liking to Virgil from when they met, when Virgil was still a child. Virgil then pulled away and then held his sword like a cane, with both of his hands resting on the top of the hilt. Sirzechs then relaxed, before he then cleared his throat and said, "It is good to see you again, Virgil. How have you been these past 5 years?" "I've been well, and I was close to finding who I was looking for, but then I get a call from an annoyance asking me to assist his sister, in exchange for helping me in my search and for promoting me to a king," Virgil said, while aiming everything at Sirzechs, who at least had the decency to look sheepish. "Well, you see, about that," Sirzechs began getting Virgil to look at him with narrowed eyes. "I can help you with your search, but as for the promotion, that can only be done once your power and strength has been seen and acknowledged. You may have been trained by both me and Grayfia, but unfortunately, due to this, nobody would take our word that you are strong enough, since it would be seen as bias." Virgil nodded before saying, "I expected as such, since you have both trained me. It could be seen as teacher's pride." "Very well, when the opportunity presents itself, I will show everyone my strength, as well as what I am." This last part was directed at Sirzechs, getting the Satan to get serious and nod his head, while Grayfia then narrowed her eyes at that, but figured he would reveal everything when the time comes. Virgil then said, now that the pleasantries are out of the way, I would like to give you my applications into Ko Academy's college courses. Virgil then pulled out a folder from his coat and handed it to Sirzechs, with the red Satan taking the folder. Sirzechs then opened the folder with Grayfia also going through it, and both noticed everything was in order, but there was something that they were curious about. Virgil, why do you have your name down as Naruto Uzumaki? That was the name my human mother gave me, before I found out that my other name was Virgil, thanks to Yamato here. Virgil responded, while gesturing to the sword in hand. Sirzechs nodded his head, and said, well, everything appears to be in order. You will start school in a month, and I'm guessing you don't wish for Rias and the others to know. Virgil nodded and said that is correct, as I feel it will be a nice surprise to see their reactions. Sirzechs nodded his head, agreeing with Virgil at how their reactions would be funny. Grayfia then walked up and asked, when did your hair become white, Virgil? As I remember it being blonde and spiky when you were younger. Virgil reached up and gripped a couple strands and looked at them, before he placed them back and said, after I was reincarnated, it slowly began to turn white, but it only grew noticeable during the years I was gone, and when it became completely white, it all fell straight. However, I did not like having my hair in my face, so I swept it all back, where it has stayed by itself. Grayfia nodded, accepting his answer. Then Virgil said, now, I must be off, as I have things to do, and people to meet before I join up with Rias and the others at the Gremory villa. And with that, Virgil drew his sword, and slashed the air creating a portal, before walking through, with the portal closing after him. With Virgil. Later, Virgil walked out of a portal in front of a mansion that had several flags everywhere that had a crest that resembled a phoenix. Recognizing the crest, Virgil knew that he had arrived at the Phoenix estate. Virgil then walked towards the gate with Yamato in hand, before he noticed an intercom to the side of the gate. He then walked over to the intercom and pressed the call button before he then waited. After a minute, he heard someone speak from the intercom. Yes, how may I help you? Virgil politely said, hello, I would like to meet with the Lord and Lady Phoenix and their family, please. Do you have a meeting or an appointment? The person on the intercom asked. Virgil responded, no, I do not, but I believe they would like to meet the one who sealed their son's demonic power. At this, the gates opened up, and Virgil began to walk towards the estate. As he reached the door, it opened up to reveal a butler holding the door open. As he entered, he noticed, at the bottom of the main stairs, was the entire Phoenix family, excluding Riser and his peerage, no doubt still experiencing pain and trying to recover as much and quickly as possible. Virgil began walking forward, but stopped and thanked the butler, before he approached the Phoenix family. Once he was in front of them, he placed his hands on top of his sword and said, greetings, my name is Virgil, and I would like to talk to you about something important. One of the men walked forward. He had blonde hair and a matching goatee, and blue eyes. He was also wearing a black suit, with a white dress shirt, and orange tie. This man then said, it is a pleasure to meet you, Virgil-san. My name is Alexander Phoenix. This is my wife, Veronica, and these are my children, Rivel and Ravel. Unfortunately, one of my children are busy and cannot be here, while the other is recovering from the wound you inflicted on him. Virgil nodded his head and said, it is all right. I can understand not being able to participate in certain events or gatherings due to various reasons. As for your other son, had he not spoken badly about those he doesn't know, then he wouldn't be suffering like he, no doubt, currently is. Alexander understood the hidden meaning. Had he not insulted me, I wouldn't have made him suffer, and nodded his head before he said, come, let us all talk in my office. With that, Alexander and his family began walking up the stairs with Virgil walking next to all of them. As they walked, so Virgil-san, I noticed that sword in your hand. Are you a practitioner of the sword? Ravel stuttered out, since she was slightly afraid of the one who sealed her older brother's power. Virgil nodded and said, yes, I am. I've been one since I was 7 years old, and continued ever since. His answer shocked Ravel, as well as Alexander and Veronica, at one training so young. Why did you begin training at such a young age? Veronica asked, her motherly instincts taking over. My parents were attacked by demons and stray devils, but even though I was hidden under the floorboards, I had a direct view as they were killed. Virgil said, getting looks of shock, sadness, and sympathy from Alexander, Veronica, Rivel, and Ravel. As they were attacking my parents, I found Yamato under the floorboards, and when I grabbed it, it taught me how to open my portals. However, since I was still young, I had no control of the technique, so I wound up in the underworld. But since I was also still inexperienced with the technique, the portal stayed open, and all the devils and demons entered as well. I saw them and began running as fast as I could, but they launched attacks at me, and so I was heavily injured. Eventually, I was found by Sirzechs and he eliminated all of the demons and devils, before he began to approach me. However, since I was only a child and I had no knowledge on who he was, I attacked him, and managed a cut on his cheek, before I collapsed from all of my injuries. Later, I woke up, and found out that I had died, and he brought me back, by using a free night piece he had on hand. At this, the four of them had looks of shock and sympathy for Virgil's situation. Then Veronica said, "I'm sorry for bringing up bad memories for you, Virgil-san." Revel then said, "And I'm sorry for starting this by asking when you began practicing swordsmanship, Virgil-san." Virgil gained a small smile, then calmly and politely responded, "It's fine, there is no need for you to apologize for your curiosity, Revel-san, or you for your motherly instincts, Veronica-san." This got the two to blush, with Veronica's being a light blush while she giggled into her hand. Revel, on the other hand, grew crimson while her head literally burst into flames, getting her mother to giggle at her reaction. After a little bit, Revel managed to finally calm down, before she then looked at Virgil and finally took notice of just how handsome he is. She also thought about how polite and gentlemanly he's been the entire time he was here, and couldn't help but gain some admiration towards him. Finally, they all made it to Alexander's office, and then they all took a seat, with Lord and Lady Phoenix sitting on a red, two-seater, Chesterfield sofa. Meanwhile, Revel sat on a red, wing-back chair, with Revel sitting on a red, Bergera chair. Virgil sat opposite of Lord and Lady Phoenix, while he placed Yamato across his lap. "So, Virgil-san, what is it that you wish to speak with us about?" Alexander asked. Virgil politely replied, "I wish to know your thoughts on the arranged marriage between your son and Rias Gremory." Virgil's request surprised, not only Alexander and Veronica, but Revel and Revel as well. Veronica politely began, "Why are you interested in this topic?" Virgil politely responded, "I would like to know your thoughts on the marriage, because I would like to hear both sides and I have decided to hear your thoughts first. Rias has already been quite adamant about not wanting to marry Riser, for obvious reasons. From what I've witnessed, your son is arrogant, insensitive, temperamental, disrespectful, and a womanizer." As Virgil described Riser, Alexander and Veronica both kept flinching, while they, Revel, and Revel all looked ashamed. Virgil then continued, "These are some things I've noticed in your son, and to top it all off, is that your son doesn't look at Rias as a young woman, or even a person. Your son sees her as if she was an object to do with as he pleases, which is also another reason she does not want to marry him." Alexander and Veronica both nodded their heads in understanding, since they both knew that no one would want to marry someone like that. Especially add on to the fact that Riser doesn't see Rias as a person, and that makes everything so much worse. The two of them looked at each other, and nodded before they turned back to Virgil. Alexander said, "Well, we aren't for this marriage either, especially since everything you said about Riser is true and we've noticed." This got Revel and Revel to look at them in shock, before Alexander continued, "This marriage was actually written up and forced by the Devil Elders, but they don't have what you'd call the best intentions. They have been around since the war between the old Satan faction and the anti-Satan faction, and they only do what they think is right, without thinking about anyone else. My wife and I have tried to get this marriage cancelled, but unfortunately, we couldn't do anything." Virgil narrowed his eyes and asked, "Why could you not cancel the marriage?" Veronica replied, "We were told that we continued to try and fight the marriage, they would make Riser head of the Phoenix House, and then immediately have the wedding at the same time. So we left it alone, but we also tried to talk to Sirzechs and Venelana to get them to our side, since Venelana is also a Baal, and they are one of the most powerful houses. Not even the Devil Elders would go against them, but Sirzechs seemed all for the wedding. I even tried to talk to Venelana alone, but she didn't seem like herself." Virgil thought about what he just heard, before he focused on Veronica and asked, "Can you explain what you mean by, she didn't seem like herself?" Veronica nodded and said, "Well, when we were younger, Venelana was just like Rias, and hated her arranged marriage with Sirzechs. Her parents were a lot more forceful, and eventually, she just gave up and went along with her marriage to Sirzechs. Then, when she first heard about the marriage, she came to me and told me that she wouldn't put her daughter through what she went through. She told me that she was going to talk to Sirzechs about the marriage, but when I later spoke to her, she seemed to have just made a complete change in her decision. This may not seem strange, but trust me, if you knew Venelana like I do, then you would know that she doesn't just change her mind. Especially if it is about something that she disagrees with. Virgil closed his eyes and lightly crossed his arms in thought, before he opened them, and said, "You're right, that does sound strange, but as you also said, I do not know her like you do. So, I will just have to take your word for it, that something has indeed changed with Lady Gremory." With that, Virgil grabbed Yamato and stood up, then he said, "Thank you for your time today, I will take my leave now." And with that, the Phoenix family also stood and began to walk Virgil back to the door. However, as they were coming down the stairs, Ravel stepped on her dress and tripped, causing her to fall over the edge of the railing. Ravel's family were shocked by this and began to run down to try and catch her, while Ravel shut her eyes and awaited the pain from hitting the floor. Instead, she felt herself landing in someone's arms, and when she looked, she saw it was Virgil who had caught her. "Are you all right, Oji-chan?" he asked, with a slightly raised eyebrow. Ravel began to blush heavily before she stuttered out, "I am fine, Virgil-san." Virgil nodded his head, before he put Ravel down, and held out his hand, catching Yamato as it fell from when he threw it earlier. Ravel's family finally made it over to them, where Ravel, Veronica, and Alexander began to fret over Ravel and make sure she was okay. After they were sure she was fine, they turned back, to see the door open and figured Virgil had already walked outside. They all quickly followed to see Virgil just finish slashing the air to open a portal before he sheathed his sword back in its scabbard and began walking towards the portal. Ravel then ran up to him and said, "Wait." Virgil stopped just as he entered the portal and turned back towards Ravel, before he asked, "Was there something you needed?" Ravel then replied, "I just wanted to know, why did you help me?" Virgil thought about it for a second before he then turned back with the portal beginning to close. But before it fully closed, he said, "You needed help, that's all there was to it." And with that, the portal fully closed, leaving Ravel staring where he was once, with a blush and soft smile on her face, while she held her hands to her chest while she thought, "Thank you and I hope to see you again soon, Virgil-sama." 3 days later, Gremory Villa. After Virgil had left, Rias and the other packed up everything they needed before they all used a magic circle and arrived at the base of the hill where her family villa was located, with Shadow still very much with them. Once they had appeared at the area, they all began walking up the hill with everyone carrying a backpack. As they were walking, Issei kept complaining about how tired he was, but after nearly getting impaled by a spike, courtesy of Shadow, Issei hadn't complained since. Eventually, the group had made it, where they all first put everything away, then they changed into their school P.E. uniforms. The uniforms consisted of a simple white t-shirt and a pair of blue shorts with white lines on the sides for the boys, while the girls had reddish-pink bloomers. Once they were all changed, they all went back outside and had decided to start by doing some warm-up exercises and stretches to get themselves limber. However, right when they were about to start, Shadow had come up and had papers in his mouth, before he dropped them in front of Rias. Rias, being curious about what the papers were, picked them up and found a letter addressed to her, so she began to read it. As she read the letter, she began to pale slightly, until she got to the bottom, where she then sighed in relief. Aquino and the rest were wondering what the papers were, and it had turned out that they were training regimens, eating plans, stretches, and everything for each of them. When they were passed out, everyone tried to see what was planned for them, but they were greatly confused when they all saw nothing but their names on the papers. Seeing this, Rias double-checked the letter, and found that the real training would only appear once they were ready for it, or Virgil unlocked it for them. They then found another paper that listed a bunch of simple physical exercises, such as cardio, push-ups, sit-ups, and a few more to improve their physical strength, while also listing exercises for Asia, Rias, and Aquino to improve on their magic. They also found weights to wear around their ankles and wrists in a magic circle at the bottom of the letter. They all put them on, before they suddenly felt the weights tighten, before they all then hunched over, Kaneko included. They were all wondering what was going on, when a little note card appeared, and said how the weights automatically adjust to the wearer's limit, and cuts off all supernatural assistance, such as a rook's strength. The purpose was to increase their own natural strength and speed, so when they were magically enhanced, they would be even more powerful and have more speed in the end. The weights would then slowly increase so the wearer feels a slight difference as they slowly progress and get stronger. So with that, the group had set out to performing their training with the weights on, and Shadow still watching them. They also found out that Virgil had great respect for women, as seen when Shadow would guard the door and the wall to the girls' bathing area. Something Issei found out the hard way, when he got flailed right back out the door, or right back over the wall, courtesy of Shadow's tail. The group would then prepare dinner according to the meal plan, and relax for an hour, before heading to bed. Where Shadow would then roam the halls, like the predator he is, hoping for either an enemy to annihilate, or Issei to flail. Shadow has really enjoyed flailing Issei, as seen when Shadow would stare at Issei intently with its tail ready for action. Anyways, currently, the group were inside having breakfast, which consisted of oatmeal with a plate of toast and jam and a cup of either orange juice or tea. The group were preparing for their day of training, when a familiar portal opened up to reveal Virgil walking out, sword in hand. When the portal closed, they all immediately moved towards him, but were shocked when Kaneko was suddenly at his side, hugging his arm. Virgil had no issue with this and simply let her be, before he then asked, "I trust you have all been training and adhering to the rules?" With his gaze focusing specifically on Issei, Rias stepped up and said, "Yup, we've been following the beginning training plan you set, and have been wearing the wrist and ankle weights as well." They all showed the weights around their wrists and ankles, getting Virgil to nod, before Rias said, "As for following the rules, we really didn't know any rules except follow the training, no peeping on the opposite gender or perverted actions," which the last two seemed oddly specific. Virgil nodded his head and replied, "Because those were the only rules I made, and those were specific for a reason," he finished, while staring directly at Issei, getting a tick mark from Issei. "What's that supposed to mean?" Issei exclaimed, while feeling very insulted, until everyone leveled a blank stare at him. At seeing everyone staring at him, Issei shrunk into the corner sulking. Virgil then shook his head and said, "Anyways, I'm here now to further specialize your training to get rid of your weaknesses, as well as add on to your physical training." This got the group to perk up, as they were glad that they could now progress their training more. Akino then asked, "So, what are we going to be doing, Virgil-kun?" "Each of you will be doing different training, while some of you will also be doing the same training since it will be easier to help several of you at a time," Virgil said, getting the group to nod in understanding, while Issei was excited at possibly being able to see the girls in sweaty clothes that cling to their body. That is, until Virgil then said, "However, Issei will be doing something different from the rest of you, away from all of you." This sent Issei crashing down, while the rest of the group got confused. "Why does the perv get special training?" Kaneko asked, while glaring at the pawn, getting him to sulk even more. "Because he is the weakest among you. Even without training, you all at least have some form of training, power, or magical ability to back up on. Him, on the other hand, has nothing due to not only being new, but not receiving any form of training, which was supposed to be your king's job," Virgil said, getting Kaneko to glare at Rias, while she looked sheepish. Virgil then continued, "Now, because of this, I have to ensure that your weakest link can at least defend himself and all of you better." This got everyone to nod in understanding, before everyone leveled blank stares at Rias. Rias saw these looks and exclaimed, "I'm sorry, alright. I was just so focused on my life without needing to focus on my duties as the Gremory heiress, that I didn't think to train and got lazy." Rias ended by falling to her knees and whispering. Rias thought they would all hate her, but she was surprised to feel a pair of arms wrap around her, and she looked up to it was Virgil holding her. He then said, "Rias, nobody is blaming you for living how you wanted without worries, but you and your peerage could have also trained a little bit to keep in shape, or get better. So don't worry, it was only a mistake, and mistakes happen to everyone, including myself." At the reveal that Virgil also used to make mistakes, everyone went wide-eyed and stared at Virgil, since they never would have expected that. Rias then asked, "You mean, you've also made mistakes?" Virgil nodded and replied, "Yes, but now is not the time for that. Right now, we have to get started, as there are only 2 weeks left of training, since I will be giving all of you the last day to rest and recover." With that, the group finished their breakfasts before they all went outside. Once they went outside, Virgil stood in front of them and asked, "Now, do any of you know how much weight you're currently walking around with?" The group all shook their heads, before Virgil then said, "All of you lift up your right wrist weight." This confused the group, but they all complied and lifted their right arms to show the weights on their wrist. Virgil then waved his hand, and a projection appeared above each of their weights. Akino, Rias, and Kaneko all had 60, Kiba had 60, and Asia and Issei had 40. They were all confused what these numbers represented, and Asia was the one who asked, what are these numbers, Virgil-san? Virgil responded, these numbers are the amount of weight you all are currently carrying. This means that you and Issei are currently carrying 40 pounds, while the rest of you are carrying 60 pounds. This shocked the group at how much they were carrying without magic, until Virgil continued, now, while it may seem like a good amount of weight, there are also seals on the weights to spread the amount all throughout your body. This purpose is so that it trains the entire body all at once, so that like this, your body grows at the same rate and lets you develop stronger, yet leaner muscles. This also allows you to train longer, since you will just be moving like you usually do, while the weight constantly grows as you get used to it. The group nodded their heads in understanding where Virgil was coming from. Virgil then cleared his throat, getting everyone's attention again. Now, I will be telling you all right now that in the little time I have, I will try my hardest to make you as strong as possible. However, I cannot do this on my own. You all need to put in the work and effort to get stronger. Is that understood? Everyone got serious looks on their faces and said, hi. Virgil nodded his head and said, excellent. Now, all of you follow the usual routine for warming up while I go change into the proper attire. With that, Virgil went back inside to change, completely missing the mischievous looks on the faces of Rias, Kaneko, and Akino. Once Virgil went inside, the three of them quickly followed behind. They watched as he went up the stairs into a room, before he closed the door. However, Virgil was unaware that the room he entered, the door has a tendency to not close, only appear closed. Moving as quietly as possible, the three moved over to the door, and then Rias lightly pushed it open with her finger. When they saw him, the three of them went wide-eyed. Currently, Virgil was dressed in a pair of black shorts that had royal blue chain designs around the right thigh and black and royal blue sneakers. While the three would admit that Virgil was incredibly handsome, what they went wide-eyed at was the scar that they could see on his chest. Right in the center of his chest was a wide scar that seemed to represent something going through his chest. Then, when Virgil turned around, they saw a tattoo that covered a big chunk of his back. The tattoo looked like a sword with a ring with angel wing on the left side and a devil wing on the right. Then they saw that the ring looked a little misshapen. That was when they realized. The scar on his chest went all the way through to his back. They were broken from their thoughts when Virgil pulled his black t-shirt on and then grabbed Yamato and began moving towards the door. When they saw him moving, they immediately began moving as quickly and quietly as possible back outside to join the others. Virgil then finally made it outside and watched as the group all were doing their warm-ups. He then moved forward and cleared his throat, getting everyone to stop and move towards him, before they stopped in front of him. Virgil noted how Rias, Akino, and Kaneko didn't seem to be as out of breath as the others, but just put it down as them getting used to the workout. Virgil then said, alright, now, I will begin to tell each of you what you will be doing for training until I say otherwise. Everyone nodded before Virgil then turned to Kaneko. Kaneko, you will have your weights increased, while needing to dodge my attacks that I will be launching at you. Kaneko's already pale skin paled even more upon hearing that, but then Virgil continued, do not worry, I will slow down my attacks, since they are normally extremely fast, but it will still be fast enough to the point that it will prove a challenge. Kaneko calmed down, and then nodded her head in understanding. Virgil then said, we will also be working on some other things, but that we can do a little later, when we're further in your training. Virgil then turned to Kiba. Kiba, you will also have your weights increased, and I will also be teaching you a proper sword style. Since you seem to be following a knight's path completely with your lack of a sword style. Kiba nodded, slightly ashamed at that last part, but understood it was his own fault. Virgil then looked to Asia, Rias, and Akino. You three will also have your weights increased, but Asia not as much, considering she is still not as strong as you two. On top of that, I will be teaching the three of you different types martial arts. The three nodded, but Asia looked worried, until Virgil continued, Asia, I will be teaching you a style that revolves around protecting yourself through blocking and redirecting, but it won't do much unless you also counterattack. I understand that you are a kind spirit and do not like violence, but unfortunately, future enemies will not take your feelings into consideration and will attack you, or worse, those close to you. I am not saying you need to counterattack, but the least you can do is learn how to redirect an opponent's attack so they hurt themselves instead. Asia looked down for a minute, thinking about everything Virgil said, and realized that he was right. There have already been plenty of people who wanted to hurt and kill those around her, so the least she could do was at least learn to defend herself. Asia looked back at Virgil with more confidence and nodded her head. Seeing this, Virgil gained a small smile and nodded his head, glad that Asia understands the importance of defending oneself. When Virgil showed that small smile, Asia, Rias, Aquino, and Kaneko all blushed at how handsome and kind he looked. While the latter three were all blushing since they hadn't seen him smile since they were kids, Asia was blushing due to how caring he was. She hadn't known him for long, but she knew his cold, hardened persona was just his way of protecting everyone, and that was always a very endearing trait to her. Virgil then said, "I will also be teaching the three of you how to use your magic and sacred gear in other ways than just the normal uses, especially you two." Virgil gestured to Aquino and Rias, getting the two to pout. Virgil then continued, "You two go for either the most basic and simple of attacks, or the most wasteful attacks." Virgil then focused on Rias. "Rias, you have the Bale family's power of destruction, and yet you are weakening your own power because you only use it as a ball of energy before launching it." Rias looked down, knowing what he said was very true. Virgil then continued, "However, I will be showing you different ways to use your magic, as well as teaching you and Aquino how to apply your magic to your martial arts." This garnered interested looks from the two, before Virgil then turned towards Aquino. "As for you, Aquino, you have a tendency of using more attacks than necessary, causing you to have less magic when needed." Aquino looked away, blushing in embarrassment, before Virgil then said, "Now there are two ways to fix this." Aquino turned back towards him, wondering what the two methods were. Either you stop using all of these extra attacks, or you make sure you more magic and stamina in order to cast as many spells as you want. When Virgil finished, Aquino looked at him in shock. At first, she was going to retort since she liked causing extra pain to her enemies, but when Virgil said about having that much magic, she grew excited at the possibilities with such an amount. Aquino then gained a determined smile and nodded her head, ready for whatever training Virgil had planned for her. "Hey! What about me, huh?" an impatient Issei shouted. Virgil then turned to Issei and had a hardened look, before saying, "I was just about to start with you, and had been planning on taking it a little easier on you, but since you seem to want to start, I guess I won't have to take it easy on you." Issei then began to pale at this. Since he was still pissed about being called trash, he let his temper get the best of him, and now he was going to pay the price. Virgil then said, "Originally, I was going to increase your weights just a little bit, but now I am going to increase them to where each weight is going to be 50 pounds, increase the gravity you feel times 5, and teach you a martial arts style, before working on your evasion speed by launching attacks at you. However, unlike with Kaneko, I will not be slowing down the speed of my attack, and just so you can see how fast my attack is." Virgil then turned and faced a tree, before 4 glowing blue swords appeared in the air, and then Virgil launched them. To the group, it looked like a line of blue, but to Issei, he just saw a flash and the swords were gone. When they all looked at the tree, they saw perfect holes going all the way through 4 trees, getting Issei to pale to an extreme, and Kaneko to sigh in relief at having it easier. Virgil then turned back and said, "Now then, let's begin." And with that, training started for the group, and while they didn't know how strong they would get, they did know one thing: never piss Virgil off. Phoenix Estate, the night after Virgil left. Currently, we find ourselves in the Phoenix Estate, more specifically, in the bedroom of one, Ravel Phoenix. Ravel was in her room, wearing a pink frilly nightdress, as she was preparing for bed. Ravel began thinking about the meeting with Virgil, how kind and polite he was, and when he caught her from falling. She didn't know why, but every time she thought about Virgil, she would begin feeling extremely hot in her chest, she would begin panting and her face would flush. She was suddenly broken from her thoughts, when she heard her bedroom door open, to reveal her mother. "May I come in, Ravel?" Veronica asked. Ravel smiled and nodded her head while replying, "Of course, mother." Veronica entered the room and closed the door, before she walked over to Ravel and grabbed the brush from Ravel's drawer, before she asked, "Do you mind if I brush your hair, like I used to do?" Ravel smiled brightly and nodded her head, before she said, "Of course, mother. You haven't brushed my hair in quite a while." With that, Veronica gained a smile and moved behind Ravel before she began to gently brush Ravel's hair. Veronica remembered how she used to brush her daughter's hair all the time when she was younger before they abruptly stopped for some reason. She shook her head. Now wasn't the time to be thinking about that. Veronica decided to relax and enjoy her time with her daughter. So, Veronica began, "What are you so deep in thought about?" This caused Ravel to blush deeply. "Nothing. Nothing at all," Ravel exclaimed, hoping that her mother wouldn't find out she was thinking about a certain white-haired, stoic devil. Veronica gains a Cheshire cat smile and leaned out to Ravel, feeling the heat her daughter's body was emitting. "Would it happen to be connected to Virgil?" Veronica asked. Ravel's head burst into flames and smoke before she nodded. Veronica hummed, feeling hot in the chest, panting, and a flushed face. "You wouldn't happen to be feeling or going through any of these, would you?" "Yes, mother. Whenever I think about Virgil-san, I always begin panting, my face feels flush, I feel incredibly hot in my chest, and then lately, I've also felt that same heat in the lower half of my body," Ravel informed with a blush, getting Veronica to stop brushing her daughter's hair. Ravel then turned towards her mother with a cute, meek look with a blush on her face and asked, "What's happening to me, mother?" Veronica's eyes were wide and she was looking at her daughter for a second, before she smiled softly and continued brushing Ravel's hair. Veronica then said, "Well, Ravel, that feeling you just described is actually something I thought would happen later in your life." Ravel turned to her mother with a confused look and her mother continued, "What is currently happening is that you had something happen that comes from our connection to the creature we are named after, and it is called a soul connection. This is something that happens when we come into contact with the one that we are destined to be together with, for the rest of our lives." Ravel looked down in embarrassment, not knowing what to make of this information that she just found out. Ravel looked at her mother with an embarrassed look and asked, "So, what should I do, mother? I don't know what to do with these feelings I have." Veronica smiled softly at Ravel, before she put down the brush and gently hugged her daughter, before she said, "Well, start by learning about him, his likes, dislikes, and such, and then try and use that knowledge to get closer to him. For example, if he likes eating delicious food, learn to cook delicious food and use that to get closer to him. Simple things like that go a long way than big gestures." With that, Veronica let go of her daughter and wished her good night before she left and turned off the light to the room. With only her lamp still on, Ravel sat on her bed, thinking about her mother's words, and realizing how little she actually knew about Virgil, other than his name and a few other details. With that, Ravel turned off her lamp and began to lie down in bed, thinking about how she can find out more about Virgil. Present day, Gremory Villa. Back with the Gremory peerage, it has been 5 days since Virgil rejoined the group, and we find everyone is doing different, unorthodox exercises that they didn't find too difficult, but at the same time, not very easy either. Rias, Aquino, and Asia were concentrating on spheres of their magic, changing the shape of them and adding details, and they had to keep this up for at least an hour and a half. It sounded relatively easy to Rias and Aquino, but when they began, they found it was actually harder than they thought. Asia didn't find it too difficult to change the shape, but it was harder for her to keep the sphere going for a long period of time since she hadn't had much training in the practical use of magic other than healing. As for Rias and Aquino, they could summon the magic for the amount of time, but their issue was that they couldn't really change the shape. This problem came from their lack of control, which was told to them by Virgil. The two of them had a tendency to either charge up and fire their magic in large but slow attacks, like Rias, or waste magic in multiple weaker attacks, like Aquino. Virgil then explained to the three of them the reason for this training. The purpose of this training was to increase the amount of magic one has if they have a low amount, or increase control if they have a large amount of magic. While Rias and Asia were accepting of the training, Aquino was a little reluctant about this, because she wanted to work on getting more magic power already. However, when Virgil explained that having more control decreases the amount of magic used in spells, she was then okay with the training, since less magic needed meant more magic for spells. As this was happening, they would then alternate with Virgil teaching the three of them martial arts like he said. Rias and Aquino received their training together, since they didn't have an issue when it came to being on the offensive, like Asia. However, instead of being an issue, it worked out better, since Asia would then be able to receive some more direct training and advice from Virgil. Asia, while she may not like fighting and causing harm, was glad that Virgil understood that and took his time with her. While Asia enjoyed these training sessions, she also grew slightly confused, since there were times where Virgil seemed very familiar for some reason. Asia didn't know why he seemed familiar, but she figured he would say something either if they knew each other, or when he was ready. For Kaniko's training, it was just like Virgil said. He began training her to increase her agility by launching his magic swords at her. He also slowed down their speed just enough so that she needs to put an effort to dodge, but they won't hurt her as long as she pays attention. Her set goal is to be able to dodge them at half their original speed for an hour. After her evasion training, her and Virgil would train in martial arts, with her method being he fights against her, and she learns the style during her evasions, blocks, counters, and attacks. While it wasn't the most normal method to learn a style, she had to admit that it was very effective for her, since she tended to learn through actions more than watching or reading. When it was also just the two of them, Virgil would act more like when he was a kid and smiled a bit more, and was more relaxed with her. He even played a few games with her, or let her sit in his lap while he pet her head. This was something she dearly missed, as he did it all the time when they were younger, until he left. With Kiba, true to Virgil's observation, Kiba did not train in a sword style, despite being able to make any type of blade he wanted with his sacred gear, Sword Birth. Currently, Kiba was being taught a sword style that focused on quick movements and attacks, as well as high reaction speed. It was basically a weaker version of his Dark Slayer style, but it seemed to fit Kiba perfectly, since Virgil explained that the style requires the user to train out of their tunnel vision, so he could keep his ideals of a knight and still fight properly. At first, Kiba found the training to be difficult, since he had to have his weights increased a tremendous amount that pushed him past his limits, but when taken off, he found himself to be faster, but gained a severe case of tunnel vision. Virgil would then tell Kiba that he has to train with immense weights before taking them off in order to acclimate to the new speed and prevent tunnel vision from happening, and that he has to do this repeatedly in order to get rid of his tunnel vision at higher speeds. Finally, there was Issei, who found out that Virgil wasn't joking when he said that he wasn't going to take it easy on him. Virgil did exactly as he said he would and amped up Issei's weights to 50 pounds each before increasing gravity on Issei by 5. Issei felt like he was going to be crushed under the weight. At least that was until Rias asked Virgil to take it easier on him during training. Issei thought he was saved until Rias added that he could punish Issei after training however he wanted. Virgil thought about this and nodded, before he then turned to Issei and decreased the weights, but left the gravity increased. Issei was asking why he didn't undo the gravity, and Virgil told him that he would be able to train less but under an increased amount of gravity, and he would be able to get stronger. Issei was still skeptical about the training, so Virgil had to explain it in ways that would get the pervert to accept the training. With great reluctance, Virgil explained how if Issei trained and became stronger, he would be able to peep on women as much as he liked, and not get caught due to his increased speed. After hearing this, Issei was greatly determined to proceed with the training, but he didn't see Virgil pull out a paper that had a seal on it with a mischievous smile on his face. Virgil only said that part to motivate the perv. He wasn't actually going to let Issei use that speed among the humans, but he would find great entertainment when he next saw the perv get beaten by the fabled, righteous feminine fury. What? Just because he was strict and rarely lenient didn't mean he didn't want to have some form of entertainment himself. Even if at the expense of the perverted pawn. This training went on for a couple days and everyone could feel that they were indeed getting stronger. They were all grateful to Virgil for taking the time to train them, when they know that even though he was asked to do this by Sirzechs, he wouldn't have cared and could have just ignored Sirzechs. Currently, it was day 8 of training, and they all had made great increases in their skills, but now it was time for some of them to tackle their issues. Currently, Virgil was with Kaneko, and the two of them were sparring, with Virgil being on the offensive and Kaneko being on the defensive. Originally, Kaneko had a hard time dodging and blocking Virgil's attacks, but now, she could feel her dodges became smoother and her blocking more effective. She knew that she was doing well, but she also knew that he was still holding back a lot of strength and power, but she knew better than to think he was holding back without reason. After all, he made it very clear to all of them that arrogance was one of the quickest ways to be defeated and either captured or killed. The two of them continued to spar for a few more minutes before they finally stopped, with Kaneko panting heavily and Virgil didn't even look out of breath. They both then relaxed and sat in the shade of some trees, with Kaneko sitting in his lap with her leaning into his chest, while he rubbed her head as she let her ears and tail out. She had missed him greatly and she felt incredibly comfortable around him, so she didn't mind, especially since, when he was petting her, it made her feel even better. Kaneko then thought of something. Hey Naruto. Naruto looked down at Kaneko and answered, Yes Kaneko, is something wrong? Kaneko shook her head and said, Nothing's wrong, but I wanted to know, why do you seem to be two different people at times? Naruto stopped petting her head, much to her displeasure, and asked, What do you mean? Well, when you first came back, you were cold and stoic, and then when it's just the two of us, you're much warmer, calmer and nicer. So, I was just wondering what that was all about. Kaneko said, hoping to get an explanation. Well, I don't really remember why or how it happened. All I know is that after I was saved by Sirzechs, I felt something was different but I couldn't place it. After a while, I realized that the different feeling I had was that I seemed to be able to flip a switch in a sense, and this allowed me to train harder and become a better warrior. Naruto explained, but upon seeing Kaneko's confused look, he continued, Let me put it this way, after whatever happened to me, I became able to turn off my emotions and thus, I become stoic and cold. That's the reason it seems like I am two different people at times, because my Virgil persona is cold, while my regular self is warm and I'm trying to get to how I used to be, since I've kept my emotions off for the most part these past 5 years. Kaneko was wide-eyed at this information, since she didn't know that would be the reason for why he seems to be two people at times. But what really caused her shock was that he had kept his emotions off for most of the time that he was gone. She then turned to face him, and gave him a hug, making Naruto stiffen up, before he awkwardly hugged her back. When Kaneko felt him stiffen up at the hug, she immediately realized that he was in a lot worse condition than she thought. Okay, this came out of nowhere. Naruto thought as he rubbed Kaneko's back, getting her to purr. After a minute of the two of them hugging, Naruto separated, cleared his throat and said, Well, now that the atmosphere is a little lighter, maybe now we can try and get you to work on using chakra again. What do you say? At this, Kaneko paled, as she was still very afraid of losing control like her Nei-san, Kuroka. Naruto clearly felt her fears as he pets her head, getting her to look up at him, and said, Hey, calm down, alright. We're not gonna work on having you use senjutsu yet, just chakra, and I'll be right here with you, but you need to realize that if you don't begin accepting and training in your heritage again, it's going to hurt, not only yourself, but those around you as well. You see, while I was away, I found out that if a Nekomato were to not use their chakra or senjutsu, it stunts their physical growth. Kaneko looked at her own body at this. That does seem to be an issue I don't like. Naruto nodded, but then he said, But if it is a Nekisha, like you, this got Kaneko's attention again. As she wanted to know what happens, they suffer the physical growth stunt, but along with that, they lose the ability to have children. This caused Kaneko to go wide-eyed, as she didn't know that her choosing to not use senjutsu would cause her to lose her dream of having a family in the future. She had liked Naruto since they were kids, since he was the only one to get her to smile, and she had hoped to one day have a family with him when they were older. Now, however, she was beginning to have doubts on that dream. She was then broken from her thoughts when Naruto continued talking. Also, if they somehow do get pregnant, and they go through the full 9 months, then they, along with the child, die, since their body won't have the strength to handle the stress of pregnancy. Kaneko was staring down and held her hands against her lower abdomen, thinking about how her choices have damaged her dreams of the future. She then looked back up at Naruto with no small amount of fear in her eyes and asked, Why does this happen? Naruto shrugged his arms, before he held her close again and said, From what I learned, senjutsu and chakra is supposed to always flow through your body and be used naturally, like breathing or eating. However, when a Nekishu stops using chakra and senjutsu, it acts the same as not eating anymore, and begins to weaken your body continually over time. You were still young and didn't have much time to get used chakra and senjutsu as much, so you didn't feel the effects as badly, but you still stopped using them. As such, your body stopped growing and it shut down your ability to have kids because your body subconsciously knew that if you were to have kids when your body is in the state it is, you and the child would have died. Kaneko was in shock at how much her decision affected her and her future. But before she could get deeper into her thought and sadness, Naruto continued talking. Luckily, the solution to this problem is just to begin using chakra and senjutsu again. Now I know you have your fears of senjutsu due to your sister, but from what I learned, senjutsu doesn't actually cause a person to go mad with power. You stay in complete control of yourself when you have some mastery of senjutsu. But if you have no training or practice, you die due to not being able to handle the power. So, this now brings up the question, if your sister didn't die from senjutsu, then why did she kill her king before fleeing? This got Kaneko to think on how if what Naruto was saying was true, then that would mean that there was a reason why her sister did what she did. Kaneko was also happy to hear that there was a way to fix her problem, but she was hesitant to begin using chakra again. She was still scared about using chakra, but she knew that Naruto would be there to help her, no matter what happens. She began to calm down before she then looked to Naruto with a determined look and said, "Thank you for this information, and I've decided that the next time I see my sister, I'll give her a chance." This got Naruto to smile, before he smirked when Kaneko then asked, "Now, when do we start?" With her own little smirk present on her face. Time skip. It was currently dinner and right now everyone was in the villa having dinner, though Naruto could be seen with his eyebrow twitching like crazy. The reason, the cheat day he gave them for today to have what they want, they decided on steak and potatoes, and while he had no issue with this, they went overboard and made far too much. However, he didn't say anything, since he said they could have what they wanted and they decided on steak and potatoes. It started with all of them, sans Naruto and Shadow assisting in preparing some of the potatoes by using magic to peel them. He did find some intrigue in watching them all use magic to peel the potatoes as a form of magic-controlled training. That is, until Issei went overboard and began to peel the potatoes like crazy, causing a mess, and peeling more potatoes than they needed. At first, they were all wondering what to do with the extra potatoes, until Naruto told them all to just use what they need, and he will also make something as a snack for the next day using the extras. After that whole fiasco, everyone was at the table eating their food and relaxing while enjoying themselves. They all just enjoyed themselves and ate, while Kaneko and Naruto continued to talk and enjoy each other's company, much to Rias and Akino's jealousy. After everyone was done, they began talking about, Kaneko said, "Hey Naruto." This confused the group on who she was referring to until they heard Virgil answer with a kind smile, "Yes, Kaneko? What is that you're reading?" Kaneko asked, while leaning over slightly to see what he was reading, causing her small bust to rub against his arm. Rias and Akino were even more jealous at this, but their curiosity won over as they along with the others wanted to know as well. Everyone then looked to see he was reading from a thin book that had a classic-style cover with the most identifiable feature being a stylized V in the center. A.N. The journal V is constantly reading from in Devil May Cry 5. Naruto closed the book, before he said, "It's a custom Mate Bible that I had specially made to have this cover." This greatly shocked everyone as they all knew that devils couldn't read the Bible without suffering painful headaches, while Asia looked a little saddened. On top of that, there was still the fact that he could wield a weapon that uses holy light and not get injured. Rias and Akino then abruptly stood up before exclaiming, "That's it!" Everyone but Naruto, Shadow, and Kaneko jumped in surprise, wondering what was wrong with them before the two of them directed glares at Naruto. They both then said, "Wielding a weapon that uses holy light and not being injured. Being able to read the Bible. We have so many questions, and you're going to give us answers." Naruto just sighed, and gently closed his book, before placing it on the table and directing his attention towards the two girls and said, "Alright, what is it that you want to know?" Rias was the first one to ask a question. "First off, why did Kaneko call you Naruto just now? I thought your name was Virgil?" Naruto nodded his head and said, "She called me Naruto because my real name is Naruto Uzumaki. Virgil is the name I use when on business and the one I've used these past 5 years so that I couldn't be traced back to the Gremory family. Why I chose that name specifically is because Yamato told me, and it's what I asked Sirzechs to tell you. Besides, Kaneko was the only one to ask me if my name was Virgil, so I told her my real name." Rias frowned as she nodded her head, before Kiba asked, "I just noticed this, but why do you seem nicer now than when you first came back?" Naruto was about to answer, but Kaneko beat him to it. "The reason for that is because he is able to turn off his emotions and he becomes cold and stoic, which is when he is in his Virgil persona. Right now, he is his regular Naruto self, and he has his emotions on." Naruto nodded his head, before adding, "Kaneko is correct, and the reason I do this is because when I am using my Virgil persona, I become a cold warrior who will not hesitate to strike his target. This persona is very useful for training, stray devil extermination, and other missions. Everyone nodded before Asia then asked, I wanted to know how it was possible for you to read the Bible? Since as far as I know, devils can't read from the Bible. Naruto nodded his head before he said, well, that is very true, but I am a special case, and I will reveal this eventually. Just know that due to my circumstances, I don't suffer the weaknesses that regular devils suffer, like the Bible, holy light, and holy water, etc. This is also the reason why I am able to wield the weapon you all saw me use against Riser that uses holy light. Everyone nodded in understanding, but still wished they knew why he didn't have these weaknesses. Next, Issei asked, hey, so from what I've heard, you've been gone for about 5 years now, right? Naruto nodded his head and said, yes, that is correct. I knew all of them, since I was 7, before I left at 13 years old, and have been gone for these past 5 years. Why? Issei then asked, well, I wanted to know what was so important that you've been gone for 5 years? The whole room grew silent, as everyone, mainly Akino, Kaneko, and Rias, wanted to know what he was doing for the past 5 years. They all looked towards Naruto, where he then looked back at all of them before he sighed and then pulled out a thick, brown, leather-bound journal that had pieces of paper sticking out here and there and placed it on the table. He then opened it and pulled out the picture he had of himself when he was younger and the red-haired, dark-skinned girl. Everyone was wondering who the 2 kids were, except Rias, Akino, and Kaneko, since they already knew that the boy was Naruto when he was younger. Naruto then pointed at the girl and said, I have been looking for this girl for the past 5 years, as she was a friend of mine that I knew before I met Rias's brother. I wanted to come back to the human world to look for her, but I knew that I wouldn't stand a chance against stray devils, fallen angels, and other enemies who would want to cause me harm. So, I decided to train under the tutelage of Grayfia sensei and Sirzechs sensei until they deemed that I was at a suitable level of strength to defend myself before I left. After that, I went back to Italy, which is where I met her when my dad was on a business trip there, and began my search. During this time, I continued searching for her while continuing my training and helping all the different factions and pantheons with any problems they had. I had managed to finally narrow the possible locations she could be to Kyoto, somewhere in Europe focusing around Italy, and America focusing around Florida, when I got a call from Sirzechs asking me for a favor. He then explained how his little Rias Rias blushing in embarrassment, was meeting her ass of a fiancé and would most likely end up in a raiding game and would need training. I agreed, under the conditions that he helps me in my search for my friend, and he make me a king. However, I found out that while Sirzechs can help me in my search, I will need to prove myself to become a king. At this, Rias felt sad and began tearing up that one of her childhood friends needed to add conditions in order to help her. Naruto looked at Rias and saw the tears in her eyes and knew she probably was thinking he didn't care for her. He decided to nip this in the bud and said, Rias, I hope you know that I didn't add those conditions as incentive to come help you. This got Rias to snap her head to him with wide eyes. Before he continued, I added both of those conditions for a reason. The first one was so that I wouldn't have to be away from you guys anymore. Because now, with your brother helping me in my search, I don't have to spend all my time searching for her, so now I don't have to be away anymore, and if I am a king, then I will have some more freedom to do as I please. Rias thought about his reasoning, and realized Naruto was right, and that he wasn't actually being selfish, but was thinking about Kaneko, Akino, and herself. Rias then smiled and said, Thank you for explaining that, Naruto. I was afraid that the only reason you came back and began training us was because you would get something out of it. I completely forgot that you wouldn't ask for anything unless there was a reason behind it. Everyone smiled to see their king was happy again. Then Akino decided to ask a question. Naruto, I wanted to know if you could also teach us aerial combat. Naruto thought about it for a second before he nodded his head and said, Yeah, in fact, tomorrow, I'll give you guys a break from your workouts, so we can focus on aerial combat tomorrow. Then, if you still want to continue doing your workouts, you can do that as well. This got everyone to smile and get excited before Kaneko decided to ask the question, Naruto. This got everyone to look at Kaneko to see what she was going to say. Why were you looking for this girl for so long? This question made everyone look towards Naruto, as they wanted to know the answer as well, especially Rias and Akino, since they wanted to know what made this girl so special that it took away their childhood friend from them, who was also the one they both liked. Naruto looked at Kaneko. Then he looked around to see he was the center of attention and knew he wouldn't be able to get out of this one. He took a deep breath and said, "I've been searching for her because she's my childhood friend, as well as the first one I fell in love with, and so that we can fulfill our promise of getting married together." This made Kaneko, Rias, and Akino extremely jealous, realizing that this girl has a massive head start in the competition for Naruto's heart. However, despite the massive lead she has, they also know that she has been out of his life for most of his life. This gives them a chance to also claim a spot in his heart, and they don't care if they have to share, they would rather share than not be with him at all. With that, everyone finished their food before they then relaxed for a little bit, then headed to bed, ready to start the next part of their training. The next morning, Rias and Akino got up extra early to get ready before they began waking everyone up, while letting Naruto get his extra sleep before they woke him up. As the two were waking everyone up, they realized that Kaneko wasn't in her room. This confused everyone, as they all began wondering where she could be, until Rias and Akino had a thought that made them very jealous. They immediately rushed to Naruto's room, with Asia, Kiba, and Issei following behind until they reached Naruto's room. Once there, Rias and Akino kicked the door open, to find Naruto was still asleep with Kaneko, who was wearing a pair of light blue short shorts and a big, white t-shirt that she stole, from Naruto the previous night, holding onto his side. What they all noticed, with Rias feeling especially jealous about, was that Kaneko had her ears and tail out while her tail was slightly curled and her ears were twitching. The reason for Rias's current jealousy is because of two reasons. The first reason is because Kaneko was laying in the same bed as Naruto was, and Rias had wanted to do that but didn't want to push her luck. The second reason is because she had been trying to get Kaneko to show her Nico features for years, but had been shot down every time, and then all of a sudden, a week of training with Naruto, and she feels comfortable enough to reveal them. They were about to move into the room, when Naruto began stirring awake, before he then sat up and rubbed his eyes. He then tilted his head to the sides and cracked his neck loudly, getting flinches from Asia and Issei, before he sighed in relief while rubbing his neck. He was currently wearing a pair of royal blue shorts with black flame designs on the bottom and a simple white t-shirt. He then felt like he was being stared at, and turned to see everyone else was standing in his doorway, looking at him. He then felt something holding his side and looked down to see Kaneko holding onto him, and was still asleep. He lightly smiled and then began petting Kaneko's head, getting Rias, Akino and Issei to feel extremely jealous. Rias and Akino because they wanted to have their heads pet by Naruto, while Issei was jealous at Naruto for being able to wake up in the same bed with a girl. "Kaneko, it's time to get up." Kaneko began to smile and purr, before she began to stir as well, signified by her ears twitching and tail swaying. She then stretched like an actual cat, with her tail extending out like a cat's, before she sat up and yawned cutely while rubbing her eyes. She then looked around before seeing a smiling Naruto, before he pointed behind her, and she turned to see everyone else. As soon as she saw the rest of their group, she immediately hid her Nico features again. "What are you guys looking at?" Kaneko asked, while looking at them with an expressionless face that would have had more of an effect if it wasn't for the blush on her cheeks. Rias was the first one to snap out of her stupor, when she then asked, "What are you doing in Naruto's room, Kaneko?" Kaneko replied, "I was sleeping. What did it look like?" Rias blushed and began sputtering, getting Akino to look at her in amusement before she said, "Era, was Bucho thinking naughty thoughts about little Kaneko and Naruto?" This got Rias to become completely crimson like her hair, before she began to glare at Akino and shouted, "And no, I wasn't." Everyone began to laugh at the two, while Kaneko had a little smirk before they all heard some soft chuckling and looked to see that it was Naruto who was laughing. The sight of his smiling face, and the sound of his laughter made the girls of the group blush, with Rias turning more crimson, which should have been impossible, at how handsome he looked and how he sounded when he was laughing. After a minute, Naruto stopped laughing before he smiled kindly towards them and said, "Thank you for that. I haven't laughed like that in so long. I was actually beginning to think I didn't know how to laugh anymore." Everyone smiled to see that he was happy and laughing, and they all decided that they liked it when he was smiling and was kind more than when he was cold and stoic. With that, Naruto got up and said, "All right, I will now be going to prepare for today's lesson in aerial combat, and I suggest you all wear some warm clothing because it'll be kinda cold when we start, since we'll be flying the entire time if you guys can." With that, Naruto got up and went to shower before he got dressed while Issei, Kiba, and Asia left to get ready as well, leaving Akino, Rias, and Kaneko alone together. The three then looked at each other with Akino and Rias staring at Kaneko with jealous looks and Kaneko looking back with a smug smirk. Rias then asked, "What do you think you're doing, Kaneko?" "I have no idea what you mean, Bucho," Kaneko said innocently, but her eyes and smug smirk said otherwise. Akino then asked, "We mean, why were you in bed with Naruto-kun? You have your own room right next to Asia's." Kaneko then smugly said that may be true, but I was so tired from training with Naruto-kun yesterday that I had passed out, but since he didn't know which was my room so he simply placed me in his bed and had planned on sleeping elsewhere. At least, until I seemingly clutched his arm in my sleep. This got the two to fume, as they realized that Kaneko had faked passing out from exhaustion, as well as using Naruto's lack of knowledge on the rooms to get him to take her to his room and then played the arm clutch card to get him to stay. They were about to say something until Kaneko then added, "Besides, with boob monsters like you two, and this childhood friend he's in love with, I have to play a little dirty in order to secure a spot in his heart. I don't care if I have to share with this girl, but I will get to be with Naruto-kun." This shocked the king and queen duo at how much Kaneko cared for Naruto that she would play tricks to get herself a place in his heart. However, after the two thought about it, they realized that Kaneko was right and that she probably held the biggest disadvantage, unless Naruto was into loli-like women. This thought got the two to shiver in fear at that being a possibility, but then the second sentence registered in their heads, and they realized that while it wouldn't be completely ideal, it would always be better to be a part of Naruto's life and have a place in his heart than to have either. You're right, Kaneko, it would be better to have a place in Naruto's heart, and while it may not be ideal, it is better to share him and have him care for us as well than to not have him at all, Rias said, completely agreeing with Kaneko, but then she added, "However, playing tricks like this is not the right way to go about it. Imagine if he found out that you had faked it, and was hurt by this. You will have lost his trust, and any chance to be with him." Kaneko suddenly gained a fearful expression at this, as she hadn't thought about what would happen if he learned that she had been playing tricks to get closer to him. She didn't want to think about what would happen if he suddenly stopped trusting and caring for her. Even thinking about that possibility brought tears to her eyes, as she didn't want to lose her chance to be with the one she likes just after he returned. Kaneko then gained a regretful look and said, "I'm sorry." Kaneko then began to cry as she didn't realize what could happen if she were to use tricks to gain his affection. She then felt two pairs of arms wrap around her, and looked to see Rias and Akino were holding her while smiling softly at her. Akino then said, "Sure, it's okay, Kaneko. We understand that between the three of us, you probably have the biggest disadvantage in terms of your body, and you feel threatened by Rias and me, as well as this unknown childhood friend of Naruto-kun's that already has a leg up on us since she knew him as a kid. So, because of that, it would be better if we worked together rather than against." This got the other two to nod in agreement before they all left the room, with Rias and Akino heading down to eat, and Kaneko was going to her room to change and get ready before heading down for breakfast. Once everyone came down to prepare breakfast, they were surprised to see Naruto sitting at the table drinking some tea while the table was covered in breakfast food items. They saw eggs of three types: scrambled, fried, and over easy, a choice of pancakes or waffles, sausages, bacon, country-style hash browns, and beautifully cooked, golden brown potatoes. They saw maple syrup for the pancakes and waffles, while there was also a bottle of whipped cream and chocolate syrup and a bowl of assorted fruits and berries around the pancakes and waffles for them to decorate their food. There were also 3 pots that had the labels, coffee, sweet tea, and hot chocolate. Everyone was wondering how in the world he managed to do all of this and get ready before they came down, when they all saw him leave his room to get ready. They saw he had indeed gotten ready with a fresh change of clothes and a shower as well, if the few droplets of water in his spiked back hair were anything to go by. They all then sat down with Kaneko to the right of Naruto, and Rias to his left while Akino sat directly across from Naruto. Once everyone was seated, they all began to politely fill their plates with the food of their choosing while they saw that Naruto only had a small meal of scrambled eggs, bacon, and the hash browns. Once everyone was halfway through with their meals, Naruto cleared his throat, gaining everyone's attention before he began speaking. "Now then, before we begin training for today, we should also begin talking about strategies for us for during the raiding game," Naruto said before he pulled out a thin binder that was full of papers. Everyone was confused by that statement, and Rias decided to bring it up. Naruto-kun, what do you mean by US? You won't be able to participate in the raiding game with us since you aren't a part of my peerage. Naruto then chuckled and said, while it may be true that I am not a part of your peerage, I am actually what is known as a free knight, and I am loosely tied to Sirzechs sensei due to him being the one to reincarnate me. However, because I am so loosely tied to him, I have the unique ability to temporarily join another person's peerage as a knight, if I so choose. For example, if your cousin Sarorg were to request me to take the place of one of his knights, due to them getting injured, I could. Also, say if someone has both knights, they can choose one to replace with me and I can fight in the raiding game. But I also have the ability to refuse to help someone if I think they don't deserve it. In a sense, think of me as the underworld's first universal knight. At this, the entire group's jaws dropped as they now realized just how lucky they were. They had thought he would only be able to train them and talk about strategies involving only themselves, but to hear that he could also join in the raiding game was an incredible stroke of luck. They all grew excited about the possibilities and the fact that they would really defeat Riser now. Now hold on, Naruto said, getting everyone to look at him. Now before you go we can defeat Riser now. I need to tell you that while it is possible for me to join you guys, it is only possible if I get teleported with you to the arena. If I'm not there, then I will be unable to join you guys. Now, I will do my best to be there, but if I am not there, that most likely means that something has come up and I can't make it, or something has prevented me from joining you guys. So on the day of the match, do not assume that I am not there simply because I tricked or abandoned you, alright? After that, everyone calmed down, realizing that what he was saying was true. There could be many reasons why he may not be able to be there, such as a sudden mission from Sirzechs, or something, but they knew what he was saying was true. With that, everyone was calm once again and looked towards Naruto, getting him to nod his head. Naruto then said, anyways, this binder has many strategies that all depend on you guys and how far you get in your training, or if I am unable to join. So, we'll spend some time right now during breakfast to go over strategies, and then we'll all head out for aerial training. After that, everyone spent the morning eating the delicious breakfast and talking about all the strategies that Naruto had made for them. They were quite surprised at all the different scenarios he came up with and how they could react with and without him. After breakfast and strategies, they all went outside wearing long-sleeved shirts and sweatpants, with Naruto being the only to wear sweatpants and a regular t-shirt. Alright, Naruto addressed, and everyone stood straight and paid attention. Now, today, we'll be focusing on your flying speed, maneuverability, and your ability to fight against an opponent in close combat while flying. So, everyone bring out your wings and then head up into the air until you're all just above the tree line. With that, everyone brought out their wings and began to fly up to above the trees around them, which was a good 20, maybe 30 feet in the air. Naruto watched as everyone was having an easy time getting up there, with only Issei and Asia having issues due to not really flying much and not practicing. Naruto walked over to the two, gaining their attention, and asked, "Want to know an easier way to start flying, you two?" At this the two of them nodded, with Asia blushing cutely while he was at it. Naruto then said, well, why not picture something you want or someone you want to meet at the level where everyone else is at, and then try flying towards it. At this, Issei immediately took off with a shout of, OPPI. This got head shakes from the rest of the group, while Naruto's sweat dropped and Shadow, who was lying in the shade of a tree, turned his tail into its flail form, but made it slightly bigger and added spikes. Asia then looked up and she saw an image of someone in a brown cloak extending their hand towards her, revealing their pale, cracked skin and royal blue sleeve. As soon as Asia imagined this, she began to fly up as well with a little difficulty, but nothing she couldn't handle, and finally managed to reach everyone else. Once everyone was at the requested height, they looked to where Naruto was and saw him looking at them before he nodded his head. He then rolled his shoulders and crouched down. They didn't know what to expect, but they most certainly did not expect him to just suddenly vanish. They looked around until Kaneko sensed something coming at them and looked up to see Naruto diving towards them at high speeds. Kaneko shouted, "He's up there!" This got everyone to look at him, and when they got ready to move out of the way, he disappeared again in a burst of speed before he reappeared right in front of them and stayed there. This gave everyone a chance to see that he was indeed flying, but what really caught their attention were his wings. Instead of the regular black leather wings coming out of his lower back, he had two pairs of light gray, almost white, scaled wings, with the webbing being royal blue in color, and seemed to also be reflective, as with each movement, they would see symbols and marks appear. He also had what looked to be sharp, praying mantis-like hooks on the bend of all four wings, with one pair of wings coming from his lower back and the other coming from his upper back and between his shoulder blades. Virgil's Devil Trigger wings from Devil May Cry 5. Everyone was in awe of his wings, and this was also further proof that Naruto was indeed different from regular devils. They had never heard of a devil having such amazing-looking wings or even having a different set of wings altogether. They kept looking at Naruto's wings until he cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to him. Now, today, like you know, will be focused on aerial combat, or in layman's terms, fighting in the air, Naruto said, with the last part being directed right at Issei. Naruto then continued, now, we will focus on your guys' ability to fly, your speed, maneuverability, and then finally combat. Now, Issei and Asia, you two are the ones who are the weakest in terms of flying, but that is only because you're new to being devils and have not had much need to fly, Naruto quickly explained when he saw Asia begin to drop her head in sadness. So, I will be personally working with you two on your flight, while I assign exercises for everyone else. This got the rest of the peerage to pale, until Naruto raised his hand and said, now, don't be like that. The exercises will be fairly easy, as one of them you may even have fun with. Hearing they would have fun with an exercise gained their attention, as they wanted to know what they would be doing. Naruto, seeing they were excited, smiled and said, now one of the exercises you'll do is just simple races against each other while you have your gravity increased, so you'll be experiencing 3x Earth's gravity. You can set any distance you guys want, and can make bets against each other before I make a race for you guys later, and whoever wins can then ask me for anything they want, and I will give it to you, so long as it's not something illegal or could possibly hurt the other factions or someone else. Hearing the prize for the final race got Rias, Akino, and Kaneko pumped, while Kiba was just excited about maybe getting a chance to study Naruto's sword, as it intrigued him. Naruto then continued, now, that will be for today. And we can do other minor exercises while doing your regular workouts, like lifting weights with your wings to make them stronger can make you faster thanks to your wings getting used to lifting some weight. All the exercises right now are easy ones and are just meant to help with your speed and wing strength. We'll work on maneuverability later in your guys' training before hopefully getting some time to train in actual combat while flying. Everyone nodded their heads in understanding, before Naruto then said, now, you all go do your races, while I help these two. With that, everyone except Issei, Asia and Naruto flew away to do their races, while the three stayed behind. Naruto then turned to the last two and said, now, Issei, said boy paid attention instantly, you need to get used to flying more and you seem to have a slightly better hang of it than Asia, so I want you to try flying as fast as you can through the forest, while dodging the trees to help yourself get used to flying, alright? Issei nodded his head before he took off through the trees. Naruto then turned to look at Asia, but then blinked when he saw her getting lower to the ground until she was on ground and then fell to her knees, heavily panting as she wasn't used to flying, and even then, she also didn't have much in terms of stamina. She was still panting when she heard someone stop in front of her and looked up to see Naruto looking at her with concern before reached down with his right hand with his sword in his other hand and asked, are you alright? Asia gasped as when she saw this action, she had a flashback to before when she was still part of the church. Flashback. Asia was walking through Italy heading to a nearby orphanage to help heal some children who had gotten sick, when she tripped over a crack in the road and fell, scraping knee and arm in the process. She began to sit up when she flinched and looked to see that the skirt to her outfit had torn when she fell, revealing her scraped knee, and her elbow had been scrapped too. She sighed as since she was the holder of the sacred gear, Twilight Healing, she couldn't heal herself, or at least not yet, as she hasn't had much training with it yet. She tried to get up only to flinch and fell back on her butt due to the pain she felt in her knee and elbow. She looked around to try and see if someone could help her, but the street was currently empty as no one was up yet, since she had left very early in the morning to surprise the kids. She was about to try again when she heard some snickering coming from a nearby alley and looked to see a bunch of men coming out of the alleyway, leering at her with perverted looks. Look what we have here, boys, a little nun who can't get up, said the apparent leader of the group. The group of men began to snicker and chuckle pervertedly, while another guy said, don't worry, sweetheart, we'll take good care of you. This got perverted laughs from the guys before they began to advance on Asia as she began tearing up in fear of what would happen. Asia began to back away from the group and was saying, please, don't do this. The group of men ignored her and continued to advance towards her, while some began to lick their lips. Asia was extremely scared at the moment, and then closed her eyes while covering her head, hoping it was just a bad dream. However, Asia suddenly heard one of the guys say, "Who the hell are you?" Before she then heard screaming and shouts of pain, as well as the sound of metal going through the air. After a minute, everything went silent except for some heavy breathing, and Asia looked up to see someone in a tattered, brown cloak standing with a sheathed sword in his hand, while the other men were all unconscious around him on the floor. She looked at her savior, before he then used his sword as a crutch and began to wetly cough, revealing to Asia that he was sick. She was about to call out to him, when he turned towards her, and she could only see the lower half of his face, but she could see that his pale skin was covered in cracks as he appeared to be breaking down, as seen by the dust falling from the cracks. He then slowly walked/limped over to her, before he was standing before her, and slowly reached his shaking, crack-covered hand out to her with his sword in his other hand and asked in a weak and raspy voice, "Are you all right?" Asia nodded her head, before she reached out and took his hand and stood up as he helped her up before they moved over to a bench. Asia slowly sat down due to her knee, before her savior then moved in front of her, and slowly got on one knee before he brought out a clean, blue cloth, bandages, and a flask that had a design of a sword with a ring and wings, that, from the sound of it, held some type of liquid. The Nephalem symbol from DMC, Devil May Cry. This may sting a little as I need to clean your scrapes before I can bandage them. Is that alright with you? He asked with his raspy voice, while picking up the cloth and the flask which he opened. Asia, still a little shaken up from what almost happened, asked, "What is it?" The man then replied, "It is a combination of medicine, holy water, and hydrogen peroxide, which is used by doctors and clinics to disinfect wounds, cuts, and scrapes. The medicine mixed in helps to make it not hurt so much when it is applied, and so I don't have to use as much." Asia calmed down and nodded her head, showing she was alright with him cleaning her wounds, before she moved the torn part of her nun's habit out of the way of her knee and arm. He poured a small amount of the liquid onto the cloth, before he began lightly tapping her scrapes, and she winced expecting the little sting he told her about, but was surprised when she didn't feel it. She watched as he delicately tapped her scraped knee, before putting down the now bloody cloth, and he began to wrap her knee with the bandages. She looked to see that the cloth was actually a handkerchief, and she saw that the corner had the same symbol as the flask and was made from white string. That meant that it was his personal handkerchief he was using, and she felt touched that he didn't mind using his own personal effects for her health. She watched as he finished with her knee before moving to her elbow and began cleaning it, before also wrapping it in bandages. He put the flask away before handing her the bandages and said, "Here you go, so you can change the bandages later, as they will need to be changed." She nodded her head, before watching as he tried to stand only to fall to his knees and hands coughing horribly, and she quickly moved to his side with a worried look and asked, "Are you alright?" He then answered, "No, my body is breaking down. I need to find the owner of Twilight Healing. They will be able to help me." Asia was shocked as she thought the person originally helped because he knew she had Twilight Healing, but it turns out that he helped her because he honestly wanted to. Even when he could have used the time helping her to continue his search, he didn't. She then said, "I am actually the one with Twilight Healing." At this, her savior quickly looked at her and said, "You're the holder of Twilight Healing, truly?" She flinched a bit at the desperation in his voice, but she nodded her head and said yes. She then cupped her hands a bit and summoned a green glow and said, "I am the holder of Twilight Healing. This is perfect." He began before he coughed up a glob of blood. He was then panting before he muttered, "I don't have much time." Though Asia heard him, and he slightly turned to her and said, "Alright, sister, I need you to listen. Right now, my body is breaking down due to my power being imbalanced." Asia asked why? What happened to cause this imbalance? He then coughed and said, "Recently, I awakened my own sacred gear, but the power it held caused my own to shift, causing the imbalance. Now, because of this imbalance, my power is clashing with itself, causing my body to continuously weaken and break down until I die." Asia looked incredibly shocked and fearful of having her savior die. However, she was broken from her thoughts when the man continued speaking. "However, you can help me by settling my power." Asia was shocked before she said, "How can I help? I don't have much training in using my sacred gear. I can't even heal myself when I get hurt." "It's okay, I just need you to listen to me, alright?" he asked, getting Asia to think about it for a second before she nodded and gained a look of determination. Alright, now I need you to activate your sacred gear, but try and focus on the soothing aspect of it. Asia nodded her head before she closed her eyes and activated her sacred gear, getting green orb of energy in her hands before it slowly turned light blue. She felt the difference in her hands and opened her eyes to see it was now light blue. Alright, now I need you to use that on me the same way you would normally heal someone, but instead of a continuous stream, try and use it in slow waves, like water. This will soothe my body and settle my powers down, and then I'll do the rest while you do that, he said, getting her to nod before she focused on using the energy on him, which slowly enveloped his body. As she kept an eye on him, she slowly saw the energy become a mix of royal blue and red, with the royal blue seeming to be more present than the red, until eventually the amount of red increased and matched the blue. As soon as that happened, she saw that the man's skin began to heal, with the cracks disappearing until all the cracks she could see were gone. Once the cracks were gone, she gasped when, from underneath the hood, she saw a pair of glowing blue eyes, before they settled down, and he smiled before clenching his fist. He then turned towards her and said, "Thank you for helping me, sister. If it wasn't for you, I don't think I would have survived another week." He then gave her a smile while nodding his head, before he then stood up and offered her his hand, which she took and stood up while also giving him a smile. "Now then, if you would be so kind as to tell me the name of the beautiful young woman who saved my life." Asia blushed, as she was never usually called beautiful or complimented in general. She then said, "My name is Asia Argento. Would you mind telling me your name as well?" The man nodded his head and then kneeled down and gently took her hand and gently kissed the back of her hand, causing her to blush more before he said, "I have a name, but I currently cannot tell you, as you would be put in danger if you knew my name. So for now you may call me V." Flashback end. After that, V stayed with her, keeping her company and protecting her, as well as some of the other nuns and innocent people. She and V grew closer to each other, and she could without a doubt say that he was her very first friend, and she had hopes of hopefully becoming more with the man, as well as hoping to find out what he looked like. However, one day he had disappeared from her life and left her a note saying that they would meet again in the future, and to not worry about him. As time passed, she always hoped to see him again in her times of need, like when she was excommunicated from the church, but he never returned. After all this time, she had thought he abandoned her, and had almost stopped believing that he would come back. But now, she is beginning to have hope again when she sees the similarities between V and Naruto. This is also causing her confusion because she had recently started to have feelings for Issei, and all of a sudden, there's a chance that her very first friend and love interest is back. Before she could go further into her thought, she felt a hand on her shoulder gently shaking her. She looked and saw that it was Naruto kneeling in front of her while looking at her with concern. Asia shook her head and asked, "What? What did you say?" Naruto then replied, "I asked if you were alright. You came down, and then when I asked the first time, you seemed to have just zoned out on me. I didn't want to leave you alone, so I stayed here and waited until you snapped out of it." Asia cutely blushed before saying, "I'm fine, thank you for worrying about me. Just thinking about something from my past." Naruto nodded his head before he stood up and held out his hand for her and said, "Well, if you're really alright, then let's get you used to flying now." With that, Asia smiled and nodded her head before taking his hand and standing up. Once she was up, Naruto brought out his wings and began to slowly go up into the air. Asia then brought hers out as well and began to follow him before she had one last thought. "Naruto-san, are you really my friend V? And if so, then why have you been gone for so long and only come back now? And what am I going to do about my feelings for Issei if it is you?" So this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video, guys. Let me know in the comment section how was the story. And also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video. Bye bye.